Prema Racing has been one of the biggest names in motorsport for 43 years and have produced some of the greatest talent in the racing world. Drivers thriving in F1 like Charles Leclerc and Oscar Piastri, and those in IndyCar as well like Dennis Hauger and Felix Rosenqvist, are among a few of the hundreds of drivers made in the Prema pipeline. And with their recent entry into IndyCar in 2025, they managed to secure pole position at the biggest spectacle in racing, the Indy 500. But just 1 year later, they find themselves sitting on the sideline without any know of when they'll return to the grid. How did this all happen? Now, before I clue you into that, it's important you properly get a scope of what the Prema brand entails. Prema is an Italian racing team that formed in 1983 by Angelo Rosin and Giorgio Piccolo, and since then, they've been known for their efforts in junior series like Formula 2 and Formula 3, F1 Academy, and the Formula Renault series, to name a few. But they recently branched out, joining the World Endurance Championship in 2022, and most recently, IndyCar in 2025, in an attempt to escape the junior category only stigma. Across that, they've accumulated over 90 championship titles at both the constructors and drivers level across a plethora of series. And as I mentioned earlier, they nurtured some of the biggest names in the motorsport world. But in its current state, it's a bit more bleak. In the past few years, Prema withdrew from WEC, and now its future in IndyCar is hugely uncertain, and even the junior categories are running into some issues. But how can this all happen in such a short period of time? Well, a big part of that has to do with the ownership changes in recent years. The ownership history goes as follows, with the Rosin family, the family of the founder Angelo Rosin being the sole owners of the team all the way until 2015. The team was a close-knit, family-run business, but with the landscape of the motorsport world shifting and money being a necessity, they received private investment from the current chairman of Aston Martin's F1 team, Lawrence Stroll. Stroll gave an investment to the team and allowed them to grow massively, and in exchange, they helped Lawrence's son, Lance Stroll, make it to F1. In 2021, the shares of the team owned by Lawrence Stroll were sold to Swiss company DC Racing Solutions, whose main owner was Deborah Mayer, a former French racing driver. DCRS also owned teams Iron Dames and Iron Lynx in the World Endurance Championship, and still worked alongside the Rosin family, and together they announced their intentions to enter the World Endurance Championship and IndyCar, expanding the team's scope, but not necessarily cutting back in other areas. Now, because I primarily talk about IndyCar on this channel, that's what I'm going to focus on here, but I will mention that the WEC program was also pretty short-lived, lasting for only 2 seasons, and the main point is that it shows that IndyCar was not an isolated failure for Prema. For the plans in IndyCar, you can imagine a team with over 40 years of success wants to do the same in IndyCar, and in 2025, that's what they were striving for. For the beginning of Prema's IndyCar campaign, the DCRS company pumped $40 million into the project at the beginning, and it did actually pay off. In their first season, the expectations weren't the highest, but Prema definitely exceeded them. They achieved back-of-the-grid results at the beginning with both Callum Ilott and Robert Schwartzman, but the first sign of success was at the Indy 500, where rookie Robert Schwartzman shocked everyone and took pole position for the biggest race on the calendar. Schwartzman was the first ever rookie to take pole at the 500 since 1983, and Prema were the first team to take pole on debut since 1984. What makes it even more remarkable is that Prema was actually behind on preparation for the 500, and in practice, Schwartzman never got above 28th, but in the matter of a day, he ended up on pole. The race wasn't quite as favorable, as Schwartzman was forced to retire on lap 87 after a brake failure in the pits, but it was still a pretty good outcome for the event as a whole. Throughout the rest of the season, the team found consistency towards the end of the year, with Callum Ilott finishing in the top 10 in 4 of the final 5 races of the season. All in all, it was a very productive year for the debut team, and the future looked bright if you just looked at the results. But there were some big fundamental issues behind the scenes, because the team that shocked everyone lacked a safety net. The IndyCar charter system gives teams guaranteed entries into every race except the Indy 500, and while every other team had them, Prema did not. This importantly meant that Prema was not eligible for IndyCar's Leader Circle program, where the top 22 chartered cars earn a prize fund. So in theory, the Prema team was competing without real rewards, and funds were just simply bleeding out. Along with the funds bleeding out, they also weren't entering either. In May of 2025, DCRS reportedly stopped payments for the team due to a rumored financial collapse. This said financial collapse was not confirmed, but we can see things like the DCRS owners abruptly auctioning off their 42-car collection, which isn't exactly a sign of great financial health. It was pretty well known that the Prema team needed a new investor, and they needed it fast. But when you lay things out, it makes sense why this team wouldn't be the easiest to justify spending money on. Back to the charter scenario, who wants to invest so much money into a team with no guaranteed rewards? And also, Prema didn't really attract too much sponsorship. Prema ran their trademark red, white, and green cars, but didn't have much sponsoring on them. With a driver lineup of 2 Europeans with little experience in the American market, it meant zero commercial appeal to US brands. And without a charter, there was no leader circle money to offset that gap. And the engine cost alone was $2.9 million. With that being said, funding was not obtained, and it progressed into what we see today, as at the time of recording this, Prema's funding still hasn't been acquired. But when you thought it couldn't get worse, it actually does. To everyone's shock, at the start of this year, the Rosen family, the ones who started it all in 1983, announced their departure from the Prema team. This sent shockwaves through the motorsport world, and no official statement was released as to why this occurred, but many people point to DCRS. This was 40 years of hard work put in by generations of this family, and actual tears were shed in the factory. Without the Rosen family, it really begged the question, is Prema still Prema without them? Because for the first time in over 40 years, the people running the show were not the ones who built it. Well, looking forward, what can we really expect out of Prema? Back to the situation of charters, they are still somewhat ignored by IndyCar itself, further lowering their chances of gaining investors. IndyCar is implementing OEM charters starting in 2028, which gives both Chevy and Honda, the engine suppliers of the grid, an entry onto it, either through a team or a standalone, but even though that's the case, there's still nothing for Prema. I like the idea of OEM entries to make IndyCar better, but blatantly ignoring Prema is not a good outlook for the team. As it stands right now, Prema has not started the IndyCar season, missing 3 races thus far in St. Pete, Phoenix, and Arlington, and don't really have a projected return date, if there even is one at all. And the path back to competing isn't very clear. Prema would not only have to regain funding, which I've mentioned is a hard process on its own, but they'd have to restaff as most of their employees have gone elsewhere to get a job, and it only really gets tougher as time goes on, as you can kind of guess there's not as many open employees in the middle of a season. The only thing Prema does have going for them is, technically speaking, they still have Callum Ilott and Robert Schwartzman under contract, so they don't have to find new drivers. Ilott's currently racing in IMSA in the moment, which he would have done alongside IndyCar, and Schwartzman isn't racing anywhere at the moment to my knowledge, but he is releasing music. Callum Ilott has mentioned though, I don't have a doubt that we'll be racing, it's just a matter of time, which does actually give us some hope. There is also another bittersweet revelation, and that's that Prema could make an appearance at the Indy 500. The race that means not only the most on the calendar, but to the team based on how they were able to produce results last year. Prema still holds a lease with Chevrolet for their engines, and even though they missed the start of the season, that doesn't mean the engine just disappears. Because the Indy 500 is classified as a separate entry than other races, and non-chartered teams can show up without any fuss, Prema could in theory rock up to the 500, race, and then not show up the rest of the year. Obviously, this still does require a sponsor to fund the operation, and an entire staff to do the whole job, but it's definitely more feasible to find options for a single event than the entire future, especially considering it's an event that has some of the most eyes on it. If this is the case, it would give Prema a shot to revisit the spot they made history only a year ago, and it could help them make a case as to why someone should invest in them, or be given a charter. But with this struggling, it's also worth noting that IndyCar isn't the only series struggling in the Prema infrastructure. All of them are somewhat affected. Over in F2 and F3, the construct of problems is a lot different, as the European Junior Series tend to have the drivers bring in their own funds. So they still function over there and the team is competing, but it's definitely different. As a matter of fact, they had a driver, Enzo Dellini, who was already announced for the team, leave the team and join Van Amersfoort Racing just days before testing began. Prema had doubts of even being able to contest the entire season after the Rosen family's departure, and Dellini made the move. We haven't really had the time to see it fully fledge out, if it was the right choice or not, but as of right now, it's definitely the option for him that makes more certainty. Even the drivers of the F2 team have admitted there is a level of change ahead of the season. As Sebastian Montoya has said, obviously it's not the easiest with the change in management, and the Rosen family leaving, especially because they have been such a big part of the team for so many years. And his teammate Mari Boya had similar sentiment about things being new. In other words, just because Prema still has capabilities to enter races in the series, doesn't mean that everything's all dandy. In general, it really just is really unfortunate. In the span of 12 months, a team had been on top of the world, celebrating pole position for the biggest spectacle in all of racing, to losing their original founders and not being able to make it to the next season. A team that spent 43 years being defined by the family that built it, that took pole at the Indy 500 on their first attempt, now sits empty. The name is still there, but is it really still Prema?